Welcome to BIV Today, the podcast from the Newsroom of Business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. The winner of the BC NDP leadership race, of course, becomes the province's next premier. And my guest today has entered the race following an extremely narrow second-place finish last year in the Vancouver Granville riding in the last federal election. Anjali Appadurai brings to her pursuit of public life a really clear commitment to measures to mitigate climate change and inequity. She sees them as centerpieces of the entire broad range of policy that any party has to have, any government has to have at this point. And she's put the party on notice that it has been insufficient to these tasks. She built credentials in her work from a very early age, in high school for that matter. She delivered a very notable speech on behalf of student organizations at COP17 in South Africa. Then she's connected with work at places like the West Coast Environmental Law, the Sierra Club BC, and the Climate Emergency Unit. She's founded the Padma Center for Climate Justice. And she has the backing of the Dogwood Institute and the Canadian arm of 350.org, two highly influential activist organizations through social media and the like. And it's fair to say she's prompted her opponent, Attorney General David Eby, to lay a couple of eggs early along the way in acknowledging his competition. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Kirk.
Candidates always need a purpose. How would you define yours?
My purpose is that I'm the tip of the spear for a much broader movement of people that have put me up to this task. The decision didn't come from me alone. It was me being sort of pushed into this position by a broad swath of folks from across the province.
And what happened to the BC NDP that mobilized you, that mobilized this movement, as you put it?
Well, I've been working on the advocacy side of things for, my whole career now. And especially in the past few years with my work at the Sierra Club of BC and West Coast Environmental Law, it's really work that's adjacent to the BC government and sort of like in a weird dance with the BC government, constantly interacting with the government, advocating for law reform and better environmental policies and better climate policies. And so getting to know the actions and the record and the legacy of this government intimately when it comes to the climate emergency and all the related pieces around it. And so there is certainly, one of the common criticisms of me is that I've been criticizing the party for years. I see that as a healthy engagement with my political home, which is this party. But certainly knowing the significant delays on climate and the utterly inadequate record on climate and the environment, especially among other things, was part of the reason for stepping up.
It is rather unusual, though, you have to admit. I mean, it's not often that you get a candidate entering the race complaining about a sitting government. It's usually you've been losing for years and years and years, and somebody says, well, we've got to change. But this is a party that's winning, and you still say it needs to change.
Yes, because, the goalposts are different in the context of the climate emergency. It's not about maintaining power as a party. It's not about parties at all. It's about what is an adequate response to the moment that we find ourselves in. And on the topic of the party itself, the party memberships have been cut by almost half over the past few years. I think there is a real dissatisfaction with the direction that the party's going as we see the world around us changing and our public systems really under strain from this pandemic period. There were also a lot of promises that were made to get this party into power. And I remember 5 years ago cheering them on when they got to victory, and cheering them on again when they got their majority, and feeling that we had friends of friends and in positions of power, and there was a real sense of hope in the air. And so there's been a real fall from grace. And I think that's what's led to this situation.
Interesting. What do you think is truer, that John Horgan doesn't believe in these matters, or just that he doesn't believe enough British Columbians believe in this?
Great question. I would say it's a bit of both. I think
Yeah.
there's a generational gap here. And, I have to acknowledge I've been tracking the climate issue for over a decade, and I can see that it's an incredibly nuanced and complicated issue. And what I see is a clear generational gap in terms of how the younger generation understands the crisis, and how the older generation understands it. And that difference is kind of along the lines of the younger generation does not see climate as a compartmentalized issue. We see it as an overarching redistributive challenge of equity. And the older generation of decision makers tends to see it in a compartmentalized way, and tends to see it as not something that impacts people's material needs. But as the climate crisis accelerates, we can see that that's not true, and that's the wrong approach. But we've been sort of barreling down a path with that approach for a long time. And so we've made a series of policy decisions that reflected that compartmentalized approach. So I think the truth of the matter is most of our decision makers simply don't get it on climate. They don't understand that a true climate response is an investment in the public interest, and is a worker first, working people first response. They kind of see it as an extra add-on after we take care of people's immediate needs, and that's not the right way to look at it.
Right. So let me pick up on that, because I've read you a couple of times saying things like that there needs to be a coherent, cohesive narrative in politics, and that too many times, well, almost all the time, what politics really is an assemblage of interests, that add up to something that you can govern by, right?
Yeah.
So explain to me how that would then inform your early steps as a leader. What would you draw together in order to make that coherent narrative?
Well, there are a lot of things that seem urgent on the table right now. Climate, there's a housing crisis, a poison drug supply crisis. What's needed is a central effort to understand the connections between those things. So the first step would be to establish a climate change secretariat and put it in the premier's office, so that decision making around climate is not being relegated to different ministries where they get lost and compartmentalized, and piecemeal action gets put forward. We need a centralized place to take action on the things that connect all of these different public system failures. And so that would be one way to begin the reframing, to see climate as the central point from which everything else emanates and is connected, because that's threatening every aspect of our lives, our economy, our ecology. And that gets to the root of why we have this crisis in the first place. This is a man-made crisis, and it's created through that fundamental relationship between society and economy and land that is no longer serving us. It's a broken relationship.
Yeah. We are playing catch up on decarbonization, unquestionably, right? And you mentioned again in some other interviews that we need a reprioritization of our economy. So what would your government be doing as early steps on that?
I think the first thing would be to re-examine some of the economic assumptions. And we'd have to re-examine a lot of the assumptions and the values underpinning policymaking in BC through the lens of the crisis of our time, which is the climate emergency. And so reevaluating our economic assumptions means looking at the model that has allowed wealth accumulation to an extreme level over the past few years, at the top of the economy, and an economic shock like the pandemic, and then the subsequent shocks from the war in Ukraine sort of showed us that the assumptions that we've made encourage and incentivize and reward wealth accumulation at the very top, and that comes at the expense of people in the planet. And we saw that last year, 2021, was a historically large jump in corporate profits, corporate profit margins, and corporate profits themselves hit record highs, highest in Canadian history. And we haven't seen that translate to wage increases, and we haven't seen we haven't seen a trickle down effect or a reinvestment in the public good as a result of that. And so that's one of the fundamental assumptions to challenge.
As you know, though, the business community in this province actually sees it as being tax uncompetitive already. So what I hear you, if I think I hear you correctly, saying is that really there would have to be a stronger impact on corporations in terms of their taxation levels, their wealth distribution models, and that kind of thing. How do you do that though, and keep people coming here to invest, keep people coming here to want to set up businesses that are long lasting? Where's the incentive for them to do that?
Well, it's a really hard that's a really hard one to get past, because that's one of the deep options and practices that's core to our economy. It's courting investment, and I somewhere across the world, across North America, across Canada, something's got to give with that assumption, and to start reprioritizing away from sort of incentivizing and inviting industry towards laying out our values and laying out our red lines, and inviting industry to conform to those. And I think there are a lot of other factors at play. BC is one of the most beautiful places in the world to live. It's an amazing place to attract employees. Vancouver's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and so there are a lot of other things that create the conditions for business to thrive here. And so I think shifting the focus away from taxation structures and towards a holistic set of values that make this a good place to do business is a good way to go.
And my perception of business is that it already appreciates these values, even though they're not as necessarily as strongly put as you would want them. But we also live next door to the United States that seems very prepared to do all kinds of incentivization for corporations. We live next door to Alberta, which is running radio commercials, trying to get me, in my electric vehicle to drive across the border and live there. How do you make sure that British Columbia actually gets that share when it might feel like you're attacking business, or that you're homing in on that?
It's a really good question. There's a few things. I think business exists on a spectrum, and some of the things that we're talking about are a windfall tax. So we're not talking about taxing businesses out of existence. We're simply talking about adjusting windfall margins so that they are closer to the rate of wage increase, and closer to the rate of inflation, so that the burden of cost increases, the burden of inflation is not falling squarely upon the consumer. And I think that's a very fair and reasonable small measure to take. And so there's a certain sort of like boogeyman mentality around taxation, but a lot of taxation that would redistribute wealth to a significant extent through the economy is very reasonable. I mean, just a 1.5% corporate a 0.1% corporate tax increase could fund half of a just transition for workers. That puts workers first towards the renewable energy industry. And so there is a lot of space within that to work with that prioritizes businesses in the long term, because I mean, some of the youth say it really well. They just say no jobs on a dead planet. And I think in a lot of ways it comes down to that. Also, as I was saying, business existing on a spectrum, small businesses are the backbone of the economy. And so we're not talking, small, medium, or even large size businesses. We're talking mega corporations.
Okay.
There's a lot of wealth there to go around.
Okay, so I get that. Now, I've also read you do say there has to be a managed decline of fossil fuels. I mean, you're not shutting off the gas pumps this afternoon kind of thing. Can that, and that you say that it has to work in the interests of workers, right? So can that only be a unionized environment, Anjali?
Interesting. I think the values of the NDP are it's a pro-union party. And I believe in the role of unions, and we're seeing a lot of conversation and debate around that in this province. And so I do believe in worker protections. I do believe in adequate conditions and redistribution of power into the hands of workers. And so, do I know if the just transition will happen only through unions? No. I don't know where. I mean, I know where those investments would need to happen to create those jobs. I don't know if all of those places would be unionized environments, but I certainly do believe in the value of unions, especially in an environment right now where workers are facing the brunt of inflation and of austerity politics.
Yeah, but what I hear you say is that you really want a cultural shift, a value shift, and that doesn't necessarily pinpoint it. Okay, so
and I'm not saying that's a perfect silver bullet solution either. We want unions that really are worker run, and that's a big shift to make as well culturally.
You talked earlier about the party membership declining, and you can kind of see this almost across the board with all politics, where young people are really not engaged in the traditional political parties in a way that maybe they were 40 years ago, 35 years ago. I mean, there's been a steady decline on this. What gets young people back? I mean, for instance, is an important question. You can be 12 years old and buy a membership to elect you, to make you premier, in fact. But we don't offer the vote to anyone at that age, not even close. Should we be offering the vote to at least someone who's 16 years old when they have a whole bunch of other responsibilities out there?
Definitely. I mean, especially now, if you look at the youth and their level of political participation, which can look different from voting, we have an unprecedented generation of youth that is passionately uniting around this issue of the climate emergency, because it's their futures on the line, to put it very simply. And so youth as young as, there are folks involved in this campaign who are as young as 12 and 14 who are incredibly well versed in the issues, who know where the levers are and who the decision makers are. And that's quite a measure of being prepared to participate in democracy. And so I certainly think that the voting age should be lowered to 16. And there's a very organized movement of youth trying to make that happen right now. I don't really see a downside to it.
Yeah, not just youth, some older people too.
Totally,
look,
yeah.
You were so close to getting a seat in the House of Commons last year. What, it was 78 votes? Am I right?
Oh, no, it was a bit higher. It was about 400.
Oh, okay.
Once advanced voting was counted, yeah.
Okay. All right, but that's still tremendously close. What did that campaign teach you that now you feel you can apply to how you campaign here?
Great question. That campaign was a big learning opportunity. It was my first time entering electoral politics, and I couldn't have predicted the way that would have the way that shook down. It taught me a few things. It taught me about, well, it demonstrated a very clear appetite that I didn't know was there for transformative change. There's a clear openness to try a different set of values at the policymaking table. And I think that was fueled by last year, the string of climate disasters that happened, where BC became a bellwether for climate breakdown across the country, across the world. I was actually at the United Nations Climate Conference after the election in November, in an international setting, and BC was really a hot topic of conversation for people around the world, because we had just been slammed by the heat dome and then wildfires and then the atmospheric river, and so yeah, so it demonstrated that appetite for let's try something different. Business as usual does not seem to be working. What needs to give here? It showed me the power of the grassroots, how they're, largely in my career as an activist and an advocate, I've kept those two worlds very separate. I've not engaged in the electoral political world. The theory of change of social movements has tended to be, we build power on the ground to move whoever's in the actual seat of elected power. So it's less about parties and more about the moral clarity of the movements on the ground. And, my heart's still there. I still believe in the power of social movements to guide us to a better world. But I think the calculus has been changing in recent years, where there's more of an interaction between the two. And I'm a prime example of that. I went from movements into electoral politics. And I think last year showed me that that's a good move. That's what we need. We need more elected officials that come from that grassroots place.
Yeah.
And it taught me about organizing. It taught me about the demands and the rigors of a campaign.
Sure.
It taught me about team culture. A really important lesson that it taught me was that the team that you build around you is a reflection of the world that you want to live in. And so the process is as important as the outcome. I mean, we lost that election, and yet there was no loss of morale from that team. It was an overall overwhelmingly positive experience for almost everyone involved. And yeah.
Okay, you've told me about 15 things that you learned externally. What did you learn about yourself?
Oh, great question. I've always been a very purpose-driven person, and I learned that although I've had a distaste for politics for most of my life, this is a place where I can be very useful and can open the door for a lot of other voices. I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought. I learned how much I love people. I mean, politics has a dirty side to it, but I think back on that campaign, and it was very beautiful for the human parts. Just that, you're knocking on hundreds of doors, you're having hundreds of micro moments of trust and connection with people. And I learned that that's something that really drives me. Yeah.
Thicker skin too, right? Thicker skin.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Glad you didn't deny that.
I learned where to seek criticism because it's important, and where to brush it off because it's not important.
Stay off social media.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask you, I think, a different kind of question. So you said that if you don't win this, that you won't run for provincial office. Now, I don't get that, because you were prepared to sit as an MP in a group in Ottawa, but you're not prepared to sit as an MLA in a group in Victoria? What's with that?
I said that more out of a sense of exhaustion, because for me, not enough time had passed from the last election to this one. This was an opportunity that arose strategically in a way that I couldn't have planned for. And so I said that more in the sense of I really do. A lot of the issues that I see with provincial politics require the support of the federal government. And so I really saw a role for myself at the federal level to support what's happening here in the province. I'm very loyal to BC. It's my home. And so my work at the federal level would be to support what's happening here. So I was surprised by my own willingness to step forward this time, and it was because of the movement around me. And so I take my directives from the party grassroots, and I'll probably do that again when the next election comes around.
Well, if they want you to get in the field to be a representative in Victoria, if you're not the premier yourself, you're open to it still. You'll take your direction from that group.
Take my direction from that group. Whatever's strategic for climate justice.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I wanted that clarified because I couldn't. It seemed to me a bit incongruent in your. Look, it's been great talking to you, and I know that you're out there getting people to sign up, and my hunch is that of that reduced number of NDP members, there's not a big youth contingent in that group. So, is that where your focus will be?
I think there's a few people who are resonating with this campaign right now. It's certainly the youth, because they want to see something different. They want to see a clear break. They want to see clear signals that there will be a departure from business as usual. But there are a lot of disillusioned party members who are not youth, who have stepped away from the party because there hasn't been a clear signal of change, and because they've seen the political culture of the party support incrementalism over real change. It's a much broader swath of people than just youth. There are folks who traditionally vote Green, who see a lot of what they want reflected in the party in our campaign platform, and there are folks who are simply arriving at a place in their lives where they're open to different ideas. Who might not have seen themselves there even a few years ago.
Okay, I have to end by asking you the delicate question about how David Eby has been treating you so far. I have to say I've winced a couple of times. I'm sure you might have done that. What's happened there? Like, what was that about? He kind of, it's almost like he gave you a pat on the head. Are you looking for a better engagement with that guy anyway at some point, or?
I have a lot of respect for David Eby, and there's a clear we are coming from very different worlds, and there's a clear difference in experience between the two of us. He's been handling these really tough files in government where the rubber hits the road for a long time, and I don't deny that. Our profiles are actually kind of similar from 10 years ago when he first ran for office, before the Christy Clark upset, and over 10 years ago. And so I know that he sees that in me and he appreciates that. I know that he respects me. I think that it's a strategy of the establishment to sort of play the politics of respectability and appropriate qualifications and dismissiveness, and I think that those are all things that they have in their pocket just through virtue of being the establishment and being an older and more experienced government official. And so he used those strategies, and that's okay. I'm really not here to campaign against my opponent. I'm here to campaign for the story that we're trying to tell. And so I haven't really given it much thought or attention. I've just been seeing it float through on my Twitter.
Okay. All right. I'll let you off on that one.
No drama here. Sorry.
Well, I tried. Okay. So it's been really good talking to you. And I hope we'll catch up again before we get terribly far down the road with this campaign, right?
Hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Good seeing you.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kirk.
All right, Anjali. You take care. Have a good day now.
Bye.
I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver. Thanks a lot for watching.